So I decided to throw this hand into a big bet, which I think is fine. Gonna have maybe already have bet a big on the turn, but as played, I think the river is fine. And now it's that time where you just cross your fingers and pray the guy folds. Do you want to know what is inside the Mechanics of Poker program? Go over to the site where you can watch a free 1-hour demo. Hi there, my fellow poker players, and welcome back to another video here at the Poker Ambition channel, in which today I'll be educating you guys on flop check raising, a very important part of the poker tree. Now, as always, if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and without further ado, let's get into some hand histories where we've check raised the flop. So the first hand, we are in the small blind with 7-6 suited, decided to choose a variety of check raise spots, so I'm sure everything will be in there. Here we actually overcall, the recreational calls in the cutoff. We flop bottom pair and we face c-bet by the initial raiser and villain folds, and now we have a decision. Now, obviously this video is themed flop check raising, so you guys already kind of know what we're gonna do. We're actually going to check raise the flop, and I think this is a very interesting type of flop check raise. Usually what you can see in these kind of spots, it's okay to use like bottom type of pairs as a bluff, as it's kind of a bluff with good equity. Let's say, for example, if we have a hand like King Jack, which you could maybe also check raise. The problem with King Jack is, yes, it has some equity, but it's also blocking villain's folds, right? A hand that villain could be folding on the flop, like a hand like Ace Jack or King 9, or maybe if he calls that fold set on the turn. And 7-6, at least, you know, we're blocking a set, which is good. We have some backup equity with the hearts. Like if you choose 7-6 of spades or 7-6 of diamonds, that would be being a little bit loose, but don't really mind my play here. I also don't really think we have to be afraid to get 3-bet on the flop all that often, as our range is perceived quite polarized. I think we have 7s and queen 10 suited basically, or like a combo draw. As you just heard, we don't have a lot of value combos, so I don't think we should go overboard, but I think 7-6 a heart is a fine combination. And in calls, turn is a deuce. We don't really improve, but I think it's a very important spot to keep on firing, which we do. We fire a nice little 3/4 barrel. We don't have to go too big to set up stacks, as it was already 3-red pot. We check raise to 100, so I think this sizing is fine. And we're kind of in the same scenario, right? We're kind of wrapping our queen 10 suited, our pocket 7s, and maybe like a couple of very good draws. The good thing I think about this turn play is that, let's say if he did c-bet a middle type of pair like a 10x, he will be now in a lot of trouble. I think if he has a better hand, like queens or 10s, he's quite likely actually to check the flop with the recreational behind. So I think his most likely holding is going to be a draw or like a top pair type of hand, which if you look at our range, let's say for example, obviously versus 7s, he's quite dead. Versus a combo draw, he still has to dodge, and obviously our hand still has equity, so he's not in a very happy spot. I also don't think getting check raised from the small blind 3-way in these kind of positions is a spot that naturally gets over bluffed. Fitting calls, so I think on this point on the turn he's sometimes going to fold a better hand. He's actually sometimes going to call with worse. I think draws mainly like King Jack, club draws, I think they're very inclined to call again. So I actually think we still have the best hand sometimes. So this is a very big benefit of check raising this type of holdings. On the river, it's up to us, and I don't think it's quite close, and it kind of depends on what he does with his 10x on the flop and on the turn. If he decides to bet call a little bit more of these type of hands like ace 10, king 10, then I think jamming the river is plausible. However, I think we do have some showdown value versus, for example, a hand like ace king or a hand like ace jack of clubs. So actually I like to check and reevaluate. I think if he jams, it's quite an interesting spot, as it's not really a spot where I think people will go very thin for value, as our range is perceived to be quite polarized. So let's say, for example, you do have a hand like ace queen here. What are you trying to get value from? Don't really see a lot of hands that can play this way that can now call the river. Basically, I have the exact hand versus which you then could be value betting. If you didn't thought about it for a little while, and he actually checked behind with king check. which is actually a great result for us. Let's say, for example, if he would decide to bluff this hand, a lot of the time, that's already like 8 combinations. If you look at then his value, I think it would be kings and aces mainly. So I think actually hero calling the river here is actually a fine play. But hey, we didn't need to invest another $655 and we scoop a nice little pot. The next hand we have 6-3 suited, call from the big blind. And we face a c-bet here on a king queen 6 and we actually decided to check raise. This is actually a concept that comes into play when ranges get a little bit tighter, especially versus EP-MP. These are also boards that you don't really have a lot of potential draws that aren't able to call. So let's say, for example, of course we have a lot of potential draws as in 10 jack, ace jack, ace 10, but they're also quite fine check calls, right? A good check raise candidate here could maybe be a hand like ace of diamonds, 7 of clubs, for example, but we're not really defending that often in these positions. So therefore you don't really have that classic overcard with some backdoor potential type of draws. And then usually these kind of hands can come in the mix to keep your check raise frequency up. So I decided to check raise. As you can see, sizing is a little bit bigger as we're representing a bit more of a polarized range, mainly 2 pairs. Maybe a hand like king jack with a diamond, king 10 with a diamond are plausible candidates. Fitting calls. And here we kind of have the same benefit, right? He's sometimes not bet folding and like pocket 7s, pocket 8s. He's sometimes bet calling with a draw. So this is usually the upside of check raising kind of these mergey type of candidates. Interesting turn. Now, if the turn would have been a club, the 3 of clubs, I think barreling is definitely the most plus V play. If the turn is a heart, it's quite close. We could either check raise or barrel. But I think on a diamond, the best play is to check. There's just going to be a lot of bad rivers for us. And I think going bat to bat, I mean, on a blank, yes, it's fine. But if you consider what are really blanks, basically a 9 or higher isn't really a blank. A diamond isn't really a blank, so it's kind of the half the deck. So looking ahead, I think this is not really a great spot to already throw a lot of money in the pot. I think we just want to dodge one card. And if we check, let's say, for example, he has a hand like 10, 9 of hearts or something. That's a hand that he can now start bluffing. That if we would bet would fold. So I think checking for those reasons becomes superior. So we're obviously check calling. River is an 8, so it went check, check. And I think now our hand should just focus on trying to get some value. We dodged the river, which we wanted. So I would like to see us now bet big. It's less likely that he has a bluff, as he would have either folded his bluff after a check raise or betted that on the turn. Let's say he had a hand like 10 jack. So I think his most likely holding here is just for the same reason we're pot controlling the turn with 6-3. I think he could also still be pot controlling the turn with 1 pair of hands. So I think we should now just get value from that. So I'd go for 3/4 sizing. I think we could even go bigger. Wouldn't have mind, for example, an overbet, as I think he can easily have hands like ace king, for example. And then folds. Ace deuce, defend the big blind. A bit of a looser defend, but we're playing higher stakes 3-handed, so the rake is reduced. And again, we have a bottom pair type of holding here, which we decided to check raise. Actually, we're now playing versus the button. This becomes a little bit of a loose-ish check raise, I would say, as we just have a lot of other potential candidates. So I think this is definitely an overplay of the concept. Because, for example, here we do have, if we have ace deuce off, we also have ace 4 off with a diamond, for example. That would already be a way better candidate. Not necessarily that the EV of check raising is higher, but we can also check call ace deuce, and we cannot really check call ace 4, or at least the EV of check calling is less. So therefore check raising I think is a plausible strategy. Fitting calls. Turn is a 9. Very bad card. We didn't really improve. A lot of hands improved. So I think we now just want to be checking and probably just check folding. Fitting checks behind. Okay, this is quite interesting. And river is the jack and it brings a diamond. And I actually decided to go for a little bluff here on the river. I think it's hard to show up with a lot of bluffs. Like I said, I already think actually this is kind of an overplay. Let's say, for example, we had ace deuce with the ace of diamonds. I think then it's already a little bit better. Then I think we should always bet the turn in order to jam these type of rivers. Now we do have to be careful though, as we're clearly made a little bit of an overplay here with the ace deuce. But I think on the river it's just very hard for us to show up with bluffs. And if he just has a random one pair hand like a 10x or a king x, or maybe even the same hand, ace deuce, I think he has quite a tough time finding a call here. And I think we're quite plausible representing maybe a hand like king queen, king jack, these type of holdings. Fitting calls, he had ace king, even at the ace of diamonds, could even consider a raise. Yeah, I mean, nice hand by him. Ace 4. This is kind of what I was talking about. So let's say we had ace deuce here. Now we are in the playing against the cutoff. We probably won't defend ace deuce. But then this was kind of the better candidate that I just discussed. The backdoor straight with a backdoor with an over and a backdoor flush draw. Usually in terms of type of hands that you want to be check raising with, these are kind of the characteristics of a hand that you should be looking out for. And obviously the more you have them, so for example, you're playing in a big blind button spot, for example, you have a lot of offsuit combinations. So if you have a lot of draws and these type of holdings, then usually all these hands become frequencies. And then when we go towards tighter positions, you will have them less often. So if you do have a good candidate, you can usually check raise them at a higher frequency. Okay, so over backdoor, I think it all looks good. Fitting calls. Turn is a 4. We do have the ace of hearts and we're quite deep. I don't actually mind seeing us barrel this hand. With the ace of hearts, I think then if the river rolls off a heart, I think we're in quite a good spot. And we do actually see that we're even setting up stacks. We're representing quite, we're basically saying that we have ace queen plus, I would say. That's kind of the range that we're representing, and there isn't enough connectivity in the board for us to maybe consider a different sizing. So I definitely like the sizing. I think the story that we're telling is quite good. We could sometimes still get called by worse, but I don't think that applies here all that often. So now basically the plan is river, heart, and bluff. I don't think this hand will ever bluff the river unimproved, as we're blocking a lot of Villain's fold with the ace of hearts, right? So Villain calls. River and ace. Quite a good river. We do have the ace of hearts, so basically, let's say we would have had another ace deuce, but we would have had the deuce of hearts with the ace of clubs or something. I think jamming the river is definitely good because he will have all the ace x of hearts that he's calling. Now though, we have the ace of hearts, so there's a little bit less hands for Villain to call us with. I actually decided to check. It's a little bit of a funky play. Basically, there's quite a lot of hands that now want to give up, I guess. Let's say, for example, I had a hand like king jack of hearts is a very bad type of bluffing candidate. So I think if I would be bluffing here, it would probably be with a hand that kind of blocks something. So let's say I had deuce 3 of hearts or something, or deuce 5 of hearts. I think that would be a fine bluff. But I think a hand like king jack or 10 jack or king 10, they're quite poor bluffs on the river if we have a heart with it. And I think if we now jam, basically we need to get hero called by hands that block bluffs. So let's say he has king queen, let's say he's queen jack. These are kind of the hands that Villain then should be hero calling, which I don't think will happen all that often. Whereas if we check, I do think he can be bluffing missed flush draws. He could bluff a hand like king jack, 10 jack. So I thought in game that there was more hands that could bluff us. So therefore I decided to check. When it checks behind 9-10, I think this hand, for example, would probably not call the river. Actually could be, not sure. Kind of also depends on your opponent, right? The more your opponent calls, hero calls the river, obviously the more we should jam. The less the hero calls the river, the more I think we should just check and let him bluff. Ace 4 suited, 3-bet from the small blind, and Villain calls. So now we're talking about like more of a check raising spot as the initial raiser. We checked with the ace 4 of diamonds, which I think is okay. Villain bets, and we decided actually to use our hand as a check raise. Not really actually too big of a fan of this play. The problem is the board is quite drawy. Let's say he has an ace 10 suited, let's say he has pocket jacks, like some combo draw, he can easily just rip it in, and then we have to fold this hand, which is quite a waste. Let's say we had ace 4 of clubs or something, I think the play is fine. But then again, then I would maybe also be a little bit more inclined to just bet the flop. So like the hand that I would maybe prefer to check raise probably doesn't really play this way, so that's kind of a dilemma. Villain calls, and the turn is a 10. I think this is quite a high frequency check spot for us. We check. Villain bets, and now we actually went for the double check raise. So we have some flop check raises going on, some turn check raises going on. And basically what we're doing here, we're kind of using our set blocker. So that's like that he has 4s. Basically, I think if he has 8s, he's obviously going to call, and then we're literally dead. So that's not very good. Same with a 10, but we're blocking ace 10 suited, which I think is a fine hand to have. And the thing is, if he has a bluff, right, let's say he has a hand like 6-7 suited, it's 2 overs and an open ender. Same with a hand like jack queen suited. So basically, this is a spot where his bluffs will have quite a lot of equity. And I also think we lack a lot of bluffs, so I also actually think this line gets quite a lot of credit. And there's already quite a lot of money in the middle. We're risking like 4k for 4k, so I think our return on investment is quite good, but it's a little bit of a funky hand. Okay, it's a little bit of a funky hand, but yeah, I don't necessarily hate the flop check raise. Obviously, the more villain stabs and the more he stabs hands like 5s, 6s, 7s, and maybe even 9s, the better it gets. Ace deuce, defend the big blind. Nice little gutter, check raise. It's a fine hand to double barrel at least because we have the ace of spades. Basically, combo wise, if we have the ace of spades, villain will have all the ace X with the backdoors that he's at least going to call the flop and probably fold the turn. So I like to check raise with the ace of spades. I think that's a good candidate to just always check raise and bet turn. We turn something that is on the bottom of our connectivity, so not the greatest of turns. We check, villain checks behind, river's a queen, and we bet the river. And I think in general, check raise, check bet should be a very big part of your arsenal when you're check raising, especially from the big blind. There's quite a lot of hands that we could be checking with, that check raising the flop with, that now want to check the turn because they didn't improve. Mainly, let's say for example, you have queen 9 suited or a hand like queen 10, maybe even king queen. Could be hands that check raise with a certain frequency. I also think a lot of our other bluffs that we decide to check raise on the flop kind of improve on the turn. So also, again, I think in terms of looking for bluffs from our side, it's quite hard to show up with a lot of bluffs. H3 would have just barreled the turn. So I think we're wrapping a queen here quite valid, I would say. Maybe even a hand like ace jack that wants to check the turn because the turn becomes a little bit connected. Don't necessarily want to blow up the pot. So I think actually we're wrapping quite a nice hand here. And villain folds. Queen 5 suited, defend the big blind. Flop a draw. Decide to go for a check raise. These kind of draws are usually quite good if you look ahead. A king, a 10, an 8 is a great card. Then we pick up a combo draw. So I like to check raise the queen of diamonds here. Villain now actually 3 bets the flop. Okay. Basically he's saying, listen, you only have 3s. I think actually jack 9 off. Jack 9 off is probably in here, 2k. It's a little bit loose, but yeah, probably in there. That he probably actually doesn't have. So not really sure what the check raise means, but we call. Turn is now a card that kind of completes the draws. And we talked about it in some other dunk betting videos. That I'm gonna now throw out a little donkey. And that's because basically on the flop he says, listen, I have an advantage in terms of overpair. And he wants to kind of leverage that advantage by 3-betting the flop. I don't think people 3-bet a lot of draws in position, and this is mainly because, let's say for example, I do have a value hand like jack 9 or pocket 3s, and he 3-bets. He gives me the opportunity to come over the top, and then he has to fold this draw, right? And in general, you don't really want to be putting your hands in situations where you're gonna bet fold a draw. It's not really a great spot to be in. So I think that in terms of 10-8 and in terms of flushes, I now turn the advantage, leading me to do betting. Filling calls. In the river, we get even more diamonds. We didn't need all these diamonds. But hey, now that we're here, we have to do something. And I think betting again is probably the correct strategy. I decided to go for a little bet. It's now going to be very hard for us to have a bluff. I think our bluff on the turn could have been a hand like king 10 of spades, king queen of spades. Well, they have now rivered top pair. You could make an argument that that actually is not really a strong hand. That should now still always bluff. But I don't think we have a lot of at least natural bluffs. So I think sizing down a little bit in these kind of spots, hoping to get called a little bit lighter, is probably a good idea. But Willem folds. Ace-3 suited, little limp pot. Oh no, not limp pot, we limp call. Willem bets, and we check raise the flop. Again, kind of an over backdoor straight draw usually. Like you see that with the wheel, that having a wheel draw is actually quite valuable. The good thing about having a wheel draw here as well is, let's say we do turn our wheel draw. Willem will have some hands that he is always folding the turn with, mainly 8-10 suited, 9-10 suited, king-10 suited type of hands that we're not really blocking. And if he does have queens, kings, we still have an over with the ace. And obviously we turn some equity with the wheel. So this is the perfect turn. And I think this turn bet will already get quite a lot of credit. Don't want to go too big. I think we want to still be able to bet a hand like ace-jack. So I think our value range here now is deuces, sevens, jack-7 suited, ace-jack. Okay, and I think ace-3 is a fine hand to add in his range. So I expect Willem to now to have floated the flop, for example, with a hand like king-queen suited or king-10 suited. He would have floated the flop with his gutters that he's now all gonna fold. So when he calls, I think he is quite strong. Or he turned like hearts with king-10 of hearts, or he just has a jack or better. River is now an 8, which doesn't improve us at all, but I do think it can improve our perceived range, which basically if you look at the more natural draws, their hands maybe like 8-10, 8-9, 10-9. Well, an 8 now makes a pair, quite a high pair as well, second pair. So I think an 8 is mainly checking now. So 9-10 got there. So I think actually we now have a fine hand to jam. We're blocking aces, we're blocking ace-jack, which are quite absolute strong hands in Willem's range. We're unfortunately not blocking, let's say for example we have a deuce, then at least we will be maybe blocking like pocket deuces. But I think just looking again in terms of how the board runs out, our hand, which blocks some of his potential calls, I think we have a fine hand to jam. So this is also something for you guys to take in consideration, right? If the board just blanks out, you have a lot of potential bluffs when these gutters miss, right? And as soon as a card like this comes in, you will have less perceived bluffs. Like what do you put people on when they check raise bet? Often a lot of draws. So usually when draws then complete, it's good that you have check raise some hands on the flop that could actually bluff when the draw comes in, that don't actually improve your specific hand. So in this case, the little wheel aces with a check raise here on the flop, I think are a good candidate. If the turn is an 8, okay, then I think we should just have shut down with ace-3, okay? But if the turn is a 4, we have the green flag to barrel. Then when the river is an 8, I think it's a fine candidate to jam. And unfortunately, the 8 we thought was very good as it will up our bluffing, as it will up our fold equity. But villain actually river 2 pair, so that's quite bad news for us. So we face a raise here on the button. We call it 8-9. Low board, we decided to go for a little check raise. It's a hand that can get some value, needs some protection. So I think this is a fine play. The stack size is a little bit meh for it. And meh is not considered a good thing. Let's say he's shorter. Let's say he only has 10 big blinds, 15 big blinds, and I think this is fine. Maybe even 20 big blinds. If he's very deep, then I think this is fine as well. But when the stacks get a little bit around this size, it's maybe I could reconsider my play. But you know, it's not the end of the world. Filling calls. Turn is a 6, and I check. I have a pretty good hand. We got some value on the flop. We got some protection. If we now bat and he raises, we have to call it off. I'm not too thrilled about it, so I decide to check and take it a little bit easy. Filling bets now. I think we have an easy call. You could also consider now raising the turn. Again, a little bit more of a protection play against like a hand like 10 jack, for example. I don't think he's really bet calling a lot with worse, but then again, we do have like some backup equity here with the 8. So it can be the end of the world, but I decided to call. River now is the 8, which now 10 jack did get there, so that's kind of trouble. I actually decided to go for a little donkey. For the people who haven't seen the donk betting video, go back to that so you can kind of get a better idea of spots that I would like to dunk. But again, if you look at my check raise range, check call turn is going to be connecting a lot in this region. So think, yes, he might have the 10 jack and I might not have the 10 jack. This is also why we might not jam and only bet small. But we do improve to quite a lot of, I don't know, let's say hand like 9-10 or hand like 6-10 suited, and a lot of 2 pairs. So therefore I think using a small sizing is good. He will have a lot of top pairs with king 9, a lot of over pairs, and that I don't think he's betting, that could maybe sometimes call. So I like my small bet here. Vinin actually just calls with the 7-5. Well, obviously if he's betting these type of hands, I think this is more of a deeper stack concept. I don't think he should be betting these hands all that often on the turn, as then I could do a way more check raising. So if Vinin has a very high stab after check raise, I think my hand is definitely a good candidate to check raise again. Seven then suited, call, could also 3-bet some of the time. Low board, Vinin bets, I decide to check raise. I think this is actually a fine candidate for a check raise with 2 overs, backdoors. Also, if the 5 comes in, then there's a straight on the board, and we have like a very good hand to be bluffing with. An 8 and 9. There's just a lot of good cards that can improve our hand, our range. So yeah, I think it's a fine check raising candidate. Turn 8, definitely one of these cards. I decided to go for a little bet. I think if you look at the board, if Vinin does a lot of 1/3 C betting, it is definitely a spot that I'm going to be check raising quite a lot and also quite linear. And I think on the turn it's good to have a split in terms of your betting range between big bet, small bet. Let's say for example I have a hand like pocket 5s or a check raise, I had like ace 4 or 6-7. I think they still want to be betting, but not for a very big sizing. So I'd like to actually have a small sizing here. Vinin calls. The river is a queen. So I think on this river, a lot of our thinner value bets on the turn are probably now just gonna check. Like I'm not gonna value bet again with pocket 5s or with a 6. So I think those hands now become checks, and we're gonna kind of with some hands now really review the strength of our hand. So I think just checking or maybe using a big bet is probably a good strategy. So I decided to throw this hand into a big bet, which I think is fine. Gonna have maybe already have betted big on the turn, but as played I think the river is fine. And now it's that time where you just cross your fingers and pray the guy folds. But he doesn't, and he had a set. Well, that's quite unfortunate for us. He's obviously not folding a set. A little limp pot, okay. Check. Vinin bets, and we decide to go for the check raise. This is like more of a check raise as an initial raiser in blind versus blind. This should actually be a very big part of your flop betting strategy, especially when boards get a little bit lower. So jack high, but mainly when the boards get even lower. I think doing a lot of checking, a lot of check raising is a good strategy. Vinin calls, turn is a king, definitely a spot where we should be betting. We'll go for a 3/4. It's probably okay. Wouldn't have actually mind to go a little bit bigger. I think that has some benefits here. Vinin calls. River is an 8. Now it becomes quite close in terms of what to do. Obviously he's improving to 8. Do we want to check and let him maybe bluff hand like 9-10? Or do we want to bet ourselves and get called by a worse jack? It's quite close. I would say that with, let's say for example we had a hand like jack queen, I think just checking and calling river is fine as we're chopping versus any jack. I think this is also a fine spot that, let's say for example we did check raise a 4, which we actually concluded in these wide information we should probably not do, but if we did it, I think that hand becomes a good check call. And I think this hand can probably still value bet. So it does actually still value bet itself. If Vinin raises, it's quite interesting. Then he basically says an 8. Then kind of the determining factor is how aggressive is your opponent. Tina Supremo, quite an aggressive guy, so I might have sneaked out a little bet call here. But Vinin just calls and he has a worse jack, which he's going to have quite often, right? He betted the flop, an 8 sometimes checks the flop. He called the turn, an 8 sometimes folds the turn. So I think a jack or a draw is a very big part of Vinin's range, even though we also have a jack. Ace king, facing open, a call, I squeeze. The recreational calls. And fellow poker ambition coach, shout out Mr. Explode, calls as well. 8-2 jack, two-tone, we check. The recreational bets out, Vinin folds, and now it's up to us. And we check raised. This is quite a fancy play. And I think this is a concept that I kind of wanted to take with you guys. Usually in lower XPR situations, if you have ace king, it's usually a fine hand actually to get it in with. In this case, we're blocking like some of his stronger hands in terms of ace jack and king jack, so that's likely. And the extra benefit is, let's say he does have a hand like pocket sevens or something that he decided to bet. Maybe he now sometimes folds. But one of the biggest benefits is, one, we never get bluffed, because basically if he has a bluff, he now has to fold. We can make him bet fold like some equity. Let's say he stabbed a hand like 5, 6 of spades. Okay, it's just 2 live cards. It's kind of hand in hand with the point that I made earlier, but the most important point is that he's sometimes going to bet call you with words. So in this case, he had a flush draw, and on this board there's quite a lot of draws, right? 9-10 suited, Queen 10 suited. Like Queen 10 suited, if he bet calls that or bet folds that, doesn't really matter. It's both a fine result for our hand, right? So try to find some of these spots where the SPR is quite low, and you are the air where you can put some pressure with ace king. In this case, having no heart is probably fine, as the recreational will have quite a lot of king high flush draws, queen high flush draws, ace high flush draws that he's going to call you with. Okay, so it's almost, you could say, almost a value check jam. So I hope you guys learned something from this video about how to maybe construct your flop check raising strategies a little bit better, what kind of cards to barrel, what kind of to look out for in terms of, do we want to bet or do we want to maybe check and do some bluffs? When do we want to continue our aggression? Thinking of the ace 3 here. In these 3-bet pot spots like this last hand here, I think it's a good example to up your aggression using check raising strategies. Now, I wish you guys a lot of luck with check raising. Go study the check raise line. It's a very important line. And I'm gonna see you guys in the next video, where I'm actually going to be discussing check raising turns. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, remember to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and follow the channel. Go take a look at other videos that we have made. I'm sure you will like it as well. If you want to see a free 1-hour demo of the mechanics of poker, our main coaching program, go over to pokerambition.com/mechanics.